and overnight got him to come on. So thanks to Diane. Credit where credit is due there. It is 6 minutes past the hour. I'll take some music. When we come back, we'll have a look through the Twitter comments. Don't forget that Gearóid Colmáin will be live on the programme from Paris, France in a few minutes' time as well. In the meantime, here's music from The Fray. This is your Richie Allen Show, live from Salford. Step one. Music from The Fray on the Richie Allen Show. That's How to Save a Life. The time is exactly 10.5 minutes past the hour. Fascinating stuff that in the first hour from Zach Voorhees, former Google and YouTube employee. Fascinating stuff. And it doesn't get any less fascinating. You might be following, you might not be following events in India and Pakistan over Kashmir. You might be, you might not be. Brexit and many other issues. Obviously Iran, Saudi Arabia, the allegations, Syria, a lot of other stuff going on at the moment. But Kashmir is very important, as much because of the way it's being reported in the Western media. And I want to talk a little bit about that and other issues with my next guest, who's not been on the programme for ages. And I genuinely have an enormous amount of time for him. He's a brilliant Irishman, a terrific journalist. And you can read him at his own website, gearoidcolmáin.org. Get on to the website if you haven't been on it before. Lots of interesting, very important, very pertinent articles on there, video and audio as well. You can often see him on RTV. He's been on Press TV and many other very well listened to and watched podcasts and videocasts as well. Terrific to welcome back to the show from Paris, our old friend Gearóid Colmáin. Diagwit Gearóid, how are you?
Tommy Gamar, Diagwit.
Good to have you on.
Thanks for having me back.
Oh, no, it's great to have you on. I know you've been busy this week. I know you've been doing shows with Graham in Ireland. I've been just picked up Graham recently, actually, Graham Hart. I find that very interesting. I don't know why I didn't know about that. But yeah, it's great to see stuff going on back home. Tell us, we'll talk first about Kashmir and Pakistan. You're about the only credible journalist, I believe, that's writing about it. And you're particularly fascinated by the Western media coverage of it. Do you want to give? I'm putting you on the spot now a bit, and maybe it's me being lazy. Do you want to give us? Do you want to give us a bit of a Cliff Note revision of what the problem is in Kashmir, India, and Pakistan for our listeners?
Well, yeah, I suppose well, first of all, the media representation of what's going on there has been very one-sided, because anybody who's seen any news stories of it will probably, have heard about the curfew, the crackdown, the brutal crackdown. The internet was cut there for a while. Military occupation, or even the Indian invasion of Kashmir. It's very much biased in favor of Pakistan's view. So you had Imran Khan, the Pakistani Prime Minister, calling for UN intervention. That didn't really work, but it was very much internationalized. The recent crisis in what happened basically is the Indian government abrogated an Article 370 of their constitution, which basically was an article that said that Kashmir and Jammu region would be sort of semi-independent until such time as it was reintegrated into the Indian Republic. So it was meant to be a temporary measure to facilitate Jammu and Kashmir region to facilitate their full incorporation into the Indian Republic. Obviously, it's a disputed territory, and half of the territory is Muslim. There's a lot of issues there. The division of India itself was obviously, the fault of the British. It was also partly the fault of, the Indians themselves. I think Nehru had an affair with Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India. He had an affair with Lord Mountbatten's wife. And I think we all know now that, what kind of a creep Lord Mountbatten was. Yeah. And, Nehru, the questions about Nehru too, I won't get into that now, but in any case, it was a shambles. I mean, India shouldn't have been divided. I suppose like Ireland, it got divided, and, on religious lines. And the Kashmir territory was disputed ever since. But, from the Indian point of view on this has basically been ignored in the press reports on what's happening there. Not only that, but the Muslim population are there's a sort of an attempt to turn the Muslim population of Kashmir into victims in this, and that somehow they're being victimized by an evil fascistic regime. The Modi regime in India is is part of the Hindutva movement, which is a nationalist movement, and which has its merits and demerits and its problems. But it's an attempt, I think, by Indians to actually finish the conquest of their country, because the majority of the population are Hindu, and they've never had in a way what it is a failure of secularism, and we're seeing that right across the board in every country right now. Just the failure of secularism. In other words, secularism is a myth. When you have a secular government, what you get is a secular liberal regime that favors minorities to the detriment of the majority.
Yeah, it does. We see
and
that here.
Essentially, we are seeing that everywhere, and India is no different. So you have a deeply corrupt liberal establishment in India. The media there are just like the media here. They're kind of they're anti-Indian in the same way that the British media are anti-British and Irish media are anti-Irish. And the Modi government, are sort of they're the populists really of India, and they're attempting to basically finish the sort of conquest of the country really, and integrating Kashmir fully into India is part of that. Whether that's justified or not is another question, because it's a question of international law, and you've got another sovereign state. But my focus really was more on just actually explaining India's point of view, because that was just not in the media.
Totally
at all.
absent. Totally absent from UK media. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie and say that I've been on top of it. I haven't. I've been focused elsewhere, but I have seen Imran Khan on BBC programmes. I've seen him on Channel 4 Media, and I've not seen counterbalancing interviews with Indian officials. I haven't. You've answered my next question, which is, why is the media so biased? And you've talked about secularism, because maybe this is some sort of a greater plan, and that's why they're so focused on presenting this Pakistani narrative. Is that right?
Yeah, I think as far as I can see, there are three main problems coming for India, and they're very serious problems. Obviously, the Kashmir is one. The other one is the northeastern region and the state of Assam. And the state of Assam and the northeastern region, which is near Bangladesh, they have a huge mass immigration problem of Bangladeshi Muslims. And it's gotten out of control. So right now they have a national registration commission, which actually existed since 1951. It was always there. It was obviously they had big problems in India deciding who's who and who's going to go to which state after independence. So they needed to set up some kind of identification system, and that system has existed since the 1950s, but it's been reactivated and updated by the current regime, because they basically, again, they want to clean up a lot of the mess in India. And one of the problems in Assam is that the Hindu population there, they fear they're going to become a minority, because the Bangladeshis are coming across the border. They're occupying government land. They're getting benefits from the Indian government through corrupt officials in the region and so on. And Assamese, citizens are becoming dispossessed, and so they fear that they're going to become a minority in their own state. And now that's a very serious issue in India because of the ethnic tensions they've had. I mean, you had ethnic cleansing in Kashmir in the 1990s. Again, the media never talks about it.
No,
but
never.
You had thousands of Hindus had to flee Kashmir in the 1990s. And over 5,000 Hindus flee Kashmir region every year, because so ethnic cleansing is actually still going on there. And for the Assamese, obviously, these Bangladeshi settlers are taking land, and these are poor countries. Land is vital, resources are scarce. They're dispossessing poor people, and so there's a fear that if the Muslim population in Assam gets any bigger, that the native population will become a minority, and that will ultimately end up in ethnic cleansing. And they fear that they are going to become refugees in their own country. So I'm interested in this, obviously, because this is a global problem. I mean, it's happening in every country now with mass immigration, and it's the same agenda in every country. Bangladesh is overpopulated. They have, so people are emigrating en masse from Bangladesh into Myanmar, into India. But that's a big problem for India. And again, that is not being explained in the media. Just the origin of the problem, the scale of it. Obviously, India has been just accused of wanting to ethnically cleanse the Muslims, but nobody's talking about Muslim ethnic cleansing of Hindus. And so in this case, the bad guys are the Hindus, and that's basically the moral of the story. They're the bad guys. When they get massacred, that's not even reported. And you see the same thing happening in Myanmar with the Rakhine Buddhists. When they get killed, the media don't even investigate. So they're sort of the designated bad guys in that story. And you find this in countries all over the world. I guess in Europe, in Ireland, it'll be the ethnic Irish who will be the bad guys, or the ethnic English in England. And it seems to be usually the sort of indigenous, what you might call the indigenous population of whatever country. They're sort of the designated evildoers, and there's just no balance. There's no contextualization. So that's one problem facing India. It's a major crisis. You read articles in The Guardian going on about, already comparing the Indian government to Nazi Germany and concentration camps and, all this kind of stuff. It could become a humanitarian catastrophe. But again, no attempt to, look at it objectively. Another problem facing India is Punjab. And here this is the subject of my next article, because it's a deeply sinister story, what's happening there.
This borders.
Khalistan.
Yeah.
The Khalistan independence movement.
Yeah.
And, it's quite big in England. I mean, there's a huge Sikh, obviously Indian community, and I suppose Sikh in particular.
In here in Manchester.
In England. In Canada, I believe they're the fourth biggest ethnic minority, the Indian Sikhs. So Canada is the kind of home, it's the biggest, I think they have the biggest Sikh population outside of India. And basically there is an independence movement which has been going on for years. But, that movement is very much being supported by politicians in Canada and in England. And if you pay attention to the way politics is starting to work in the West, the left liberals are relying more and more on votes of minorities. So Corbyn and Trudeau and all these people, they pander to whatever ethnic minorities are in their country to get votes. And that's what, the more the merrier for them. So this is kind of so basically what you're seeing developing here is an independence movement, very much supported by politicians in the UK and in Canada. And this actually led to a diplomatic spat, I believe it was last year, between India and Canada, because the foreign minister of Canada is a Sikh, and when he went to India, he met basically Khalistani separatists. So the Indians were freaking out over that. Modi refused to actually meet Trudeau over this. He sent a low-level official to greet him. So there's already a diplomatic tension with the West because of this. And again, if you read the nationalist media in Italy, they're accusing the British of backing terrorism, and that would that surprise us? These
No.
Now these Khalistani independents. Just one more thing about them. Very few people, we've heard of Islamic terrorism, and we've heard of other terrorist groups, but very few people probably have heard of the Sikh terrorist groups. In the 1980s, they were very active. They're still very active, and they were. Without getting into too much detail here, the most important thing to understand about the Sikh terrorists is that their base was in Canada, and probably still is, and the UK. And in 1985, the biggest terrorist attack in North American history before 9/11 happened just off the Irish coast, and it was an Air India flight 185 or 184, I think. And 307 people were killed, 86 children blown up off the Irish coast by Sikh terrorists. And the authorities in Canada, the prosecution took a very long time, way too long, and it was botched. I mean, the Canadian Secret Service were accused of having basically they destroyed evidence. Nobody knows why. But eventually, people were prosecuted. Terrorists were prosecuted. Talvinder Singh Parmar was most famous leader of the Khalistani independence movement, and it was these Sikh leaders, these Sikh terrorist leaders, who masterminded the terrorist attack. And every year during Sikh Independence Day or Sikh, they have kind of Sikh national festival in Canada and in the UK. They these organizations actually join the parade, and they have like the slogans of the terrorists who committed the atrocity in 1985. And Canadian politicians have been seen, dining with these people. This is a huge lobby, and so this is essentially the nature of the Khalistani independence movement. You've got very high level terrorists involved in that. And so this is something that is quite, I think, worrying for India, but also for us, because these are the people now who are partly in government. One of the presidential candidates in Canada, I'm not saying he's a terrorist, but he is from the Sikh community, and he's definitely playing down the terrorist element in the independence movement. And this is kind of, I'm just trying to kind of describe the kind of chaos we're in now, where we've got ethnic groups in our own countries that are powerful and are even in our government and are involved in destabilization of the home country, and
where do we see that in? What you've been describing there is going to be brand new information to most of my listeners, because they just don't have a clue. It's not because they're stupid. It's not because they're ignorant or lazy. It's just they don't know. It's over the other side of the world, and there's so much going on closer to home. What you've done, and I mean this, it's brilliant the way you've written about this on gearóid.colmáin.org. I recommend you get onto that, folks. Bookmark the website, read these articles, because when you're reading what's happening there in that part of the world, as Gearóid has been writing about it, as he said already, it's being mirrored here in Europe and in the United States and Canada. This is happening. You say some of these minority groups are managing to achieve some success politically.
Yes, I mean
even here,
the Sikhs, for example, in Canada, are very successful. I mean, they're a very successful ethnic group in Canada. It's in a way, it's a kind of a success story from a Sikh perspective. You had the former governor of British Columbia was Sikh. Now, he was a major critic of the Sikh terrorists, and they attacked him many times. He was hospitalized several times, I believe, for critiquing them. I mean, but the Sikh community are quite successful because, I don't know, I couldn't explain why they're so successful, but maybe one of the possible reasons is that they were part of the elite in India, and so they were a fairly elite caste. So they're well connected. But in Canada, they're so powerful now that Canadian politicians basically have to lobby them to get votes.
That's fascinating to me, Gearóid. Can I just interject there? That's fascinating because here I know some Sikhs here in Manchester, and there is I suppose a fairly substantial population of Sikhs here. My very uneducated observation, it must be said, of Sikh men and women is they tend to be very well integrated, I think. And it's not just because a Sikh will have a drink now. That's lazy,
Sikh,
but yeah.
The Sikh minorities, I would agree, the Sikh minorities seem to be very well integrated in the sense, and also they do very interesting social work. In London, for example, I saw reports about the Gurdwaras, I think that's what they call their temples, where they provide food for homeless people. It's actually the Sikhs now who are increasingly taking over charity work, and they're providing food for everybody. You don't have to be a Sikh to get free meals. So this has nothing to do with the Sikh community as such. This is to do with people who are in bed with our elites,
right?
Terrorist groups, who are pushing a really nefarious agenda. I mean, these people terrorize their own people. I mean, they blew up. There were Sikhs in that plane that they blew up, over Ireland as well. And there's obviously, this is one of the contradictions of globalization. But you're finding increasingly that ethnic minorities who climb the social ladder, ally with other, with politicians, and basically it's a kind of it's a class solidarity. I mean, this is class politics. These people are part of the ruling class in Canada now, and they I guess feel that if they can get an independent state from out of India, which is a very wealthy part of India, that will be in their interests, and it would also, I suppose, be in the interests of a lot of Canadian businessmen.
Of course, it will,
et cetera, and British as well. But there's also another process there that needs to be mentioned, which is the descent into micro states. I've spoken about that and written about that before. You have a process whereby nation states are breaking up into smaller states. And that's based on, it's a long-term globalist agenda. It's based on the philosophy of small is beautiful of Leopold Kohr, who was an economist from the London School of Economics. And it's based on the idea that, if we just had city-states, then we'd have better democracy and so on. But ultimately, you're seeing Catalonia in Spain, possibly Scotland, leaving the UK, but all remaining within
the European Union
institution.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And if the European Union breaks up, which I think it temporarily will.
Now explain that. Hang on. I love this because my listeners are subjected, sadly for them, to my opinions on this far too often. You think temporarily the European Union might break up? Explain.
I think that if Britain leaves, and I hope they do manage to leave, I think that the European Union could temporarily go through a period of chaos where the central institutions would collapse. It's what Soros is predicting. Now if he's predicting it, it may even be part of long-term project.
Right.
But I think that what could happen in Europe is Europe could disintegrate. The central structures could collapse, and then the nation states would start to disintegrate as well. When there'd be no more representative government, there'd be no more budgets. You could have a situation of what's happening in Spain spreading. Now there is a map, the Heineken, the Freddie Heineken map. If your listeners there, they can check it up online. That has, I don't know how many states, but each nation state is split up into several statelets. But I think that if that happened, what would happen is that the European peninsula would be absorbed by the Eurasian Union. and that's, you'd still have global government. I mean, that would be a global government, because that is the world island,
Indeed
essentially.
it is.
The Eurasian Union. Africa's practically joined to it, and there you have it, the world island, essentially. So that, the long-term aim, I think, of globalism probably is that, because the only way to really wrest sovereignty, completely take sovereignty away from European people, is just to divide up their countries. So that's probably going to happen to other countries as well, unless they can prevent it. But, to come back to India, I think that essentially this, the process of promoting independence there, and it could be promoted by outside powers, is part of that as well.
Yeah, I remember I remember 2 years ago, Richard Haas, Council on Foreign Relations, gave a keynote address that is on YouTube for anybody who wants to watch it. And he talked about the idea of the nation state and national sovereignty being dead, that basically countries, benevolent countries, need to accept that and understand that they need to intervene in other nations, whether or not you've been attacked by them. They might be doing something that might be harming the environment, or might be harming people, or might be harming fish or plants or whatever. But if need be, we need to get in there. And I made a big deal of that at the time when I heard it. I broke it up into little segments. So what you're saying is very, very, very interesting. I'm going to tweet out that map, that Freddie Heineken map for
Freddie Heineken map. Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is that I've made the point before, and I'm not anti-Putin. I'm neither a Putinophobe nor a Putinophile. I'm skeptical of Russia's long-term role in the world. But I think that the Russians, I got the impression in Spain, that the Russians were kind of in the media war there. I didn't see too much truth coming from Russian media on the separatists in Spain. Because I actually think that long term, European states breaking up would actually be in Russia's interest if all those statelets were absorbed by the Eurasian Union. But ultimately, where is that going to go? It's still going to go towards global government.
Yeah, global governance.
Now, if you look at capitals like Astana in the east, I mean, those, in my opinion, Astana is a kind of it's a global capital in waiting, and the city is completely Freemasonic. I mean, from start to finish. I don't know if you've seen any.
I haven't. I mean, I'll be the first to admit, I know it's in Kazakhstan. That's about the size of it, and that's because I'm a football fan. I know about Kazakhstan, of course, historically, last 20, 30 years, of course I do. But I wouldn't be paying much attention of late as to what's happening there, apart from what you get from the Telegraph, the Guardian, the BBC News. Why Astana? So Astana would be perfectly placed. Tell us about this Freemasonic architecture or symbolism in Astana. That's fascinating to me. Tell me about that.
It is, yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but I do know that the entire city is based on Freemasonry, and I'm not an expert on all the coordinates, and you can look it up yourself. But I do know that Astana is becoming. I mean, it's part of the Russian sponsored peace process in Syria. The Astana talks. Astana is kind of, the city has been built to be, a center for Eurasian unity and for Eurasian integration. And again, I'm not criticizing what's going on, because the Russians have had a largely positive role in resolving in finishing the war in Syria, and they've been on the right side of history there. But again, I'm not impressed by cities that are laid out like that, because, well, what does that represent? I mean, where is that going?
Where is it going? Yeah.
And I think that there is a sense in which I don't see Russia as being necessarily an opponent of the New World Order. I think Russia's nation state, which has interests, but China as well. I don't kind of buy into the whole idea that Putin is an anti-Zionist, or he's not.
No, he's not. Of course, he's not. He's a Zionist.
He's always been a Zionist.
Always.
And he's been open about it, and he's never made any. It's never been a secret.
Hasn't he conducted? Gearóid. Hasn't he conducted or held more meetings with Benjamin Netanyahu. Interestingly enough, of course, Israeli elections today. But hasn't Putin had plenty of FaceTime with Netanyahu, maybe more than any other leader in the world of late in the last 12 months or 2 years?
Possibly,
I think so.
Yeah. And again, the two, I mean, Israel and Russia are very close because on a research level, in high technology, nanotechnology, military. I mean, the Russian military buys an awful lot of Israeli arms. Yeah. So, and a lot of, I mentioned that in my article, and again, just the one I just finished on India, because a lot of what kind of fools people when they look at these conflicts is they kind of try to pick out the good guys and bad guys. And what happens when there's ethnic conflict with Muslims involved is that the Muslims sort of think, oh, this is Palestine and Israel. So like I've heard so many people in the media, the alternative media saying that, that this is like the Palestinians and Israelis. And of course, the Indians are the Israelis and the Kashmiris are the Palestinians. And it's just a complete caricature of politics, or the Modi regime buys lots of arms from Israel, and therefore it's evil. I mean, well, so does Putin. I mean, it's like I saw this as well in Myanmar. Where this is part of the kind of the information war that a lot of these Muslim Brotherhood controlled countries do. Is to constantly try and say, even when they're the aggressors, that they're like the Palestinians and they're like the Gazans and so on. And it sort of just it fools people, and it's definitely what's happening in Myanmar. There again, I've covered that a lot, and so you've seen that process a lot in Asia. You're going to see that a lot more in Asia. Actually, Thailand is another country with a lot of problems. There are lots of countries where that narrative is used.
These are Gearóid Colmáin is our guest. We've got Gearóid for another 10 minutes tops. I think we're flying through here. This is important stuff. There isn't anybody else writing about this. You need to go to gearoidcolmain.org. I'll put a link out to it in case you Philistine, you can't spell Gearóid Colmáin. Outrageous. You should be able to do that at this stage. But we'll get you on. I want to just. We're talking about uprisings, movements, protests, people understanding what is happening, and then people who don't. We've talked about identity politics, secularism. This is really important. The Yellow Vest protests began last autumn. We're a year into it nearly, and astonishingly, they're very healthy in terms of that. The people are still going out on the streets. What do we think now? What do you think now about that movement and what it is, what it's morphed into? Whether it's a force for good, whether it's genuine. I know these are kind of big questions, but you're there and nobody knows more about it than you that I know anyway. I don't know anybody else who's right there and who's seen it and has watched it, who's written about it. What's happened? What is it?
Well, right now, I can't say I'm optimistic about the movement. It's not going to overthrow Macron as far as I can see. We're not going to see, a revolution with, people waving flags outside the Champs-Élysées, and it's not. That aspect of it has kind of withered away. It's the movement is still there, it's still strong because the issues are still there. I mean, and nothing really has been done. And so as Macron basically dismantles the French economy, as you have the deindustrialization, you have the mass immigration, all these things. But politically, the movement doesn't have an actual focus and never did. So you've had far right groups and far left groups trying to sort of get control of the movement. And, the so-called far left, the Trotskyites, Mélenchon is, got, hammered in the European elections. He's really a has-been, but because he's a Freemason and he's very well connected, and he's close to Serge Dassault, who's the chief arms manufacturer in France, he could, they could resurrect him. But the left were never really able to own the Gilets jaunes movement, because the left are not. They don't represent working class issues.
No, of course they don't.
The main focus of the left is defending the cause of finance capitalism through the sexual revolution and mass immigration and global warming. I mean, they're the three. That's what I call the diabolical trinity of the left. It's global warming, sexual revolution, and immigration. And
vulnerable groups, and protecting vulnerable groups, which is where we came in, protecting vulnerable groups. You and I got into this the very first time we spoke about how the term socialist or socialism has been hijacked over the decades by the media and by social democrats. There is no socialism anywhere.
This happened in France in the 1980s with François Mitterrand, because when the socialists got into power, they couldn't deliver. They couldn't, actually implement socialism, or they weren't really socialists anyway. But
no.
So in order to sort of, I suppose, make people believe that they were that they stood for something, they kind of started pushing this anti-racism agenda. When of course anti-racism really was what it was is saying to the working class, we're not going to improve your wages. We're not going to, give you what you want. In fact, we're going to replace you with cheap workers, and we're going to call you a racist if you've got a problem with that. So that's the entire origin of the anti-racist movement, and that's the cause of the left today. Which is why, if I was, George Soros, I would definitely be funding the left, because that's, they're doing a great job in bullying.
Silencing people. And silencing people. Yeah,
they bully them. And we see this in Ireland as well. I mean, I saw a video there recently. I was talking to Brian about it last night, and just the way they're bullying Irish people in rural communities, sending out these government agents who go in, and anybody who objects to the refugee centre or whatever, you have these little bullies going around. It's like, that's got to stop.
That's like McCarthyism.
The first people to be ejected should be those people, those government agents, those NGOs.
Yeah, these are mad times, Gearóid. I see it here as well. I mean, you and I are the first to talk about. We are the first to point out that many people have been displaced from their homes because of the aggression of the French, the British, the Israelis, the Americans. What they've done. We destroy people's homes, their countries.
Yes, of course.
And you and I, and we would never say otherwise, you and I. But people have got to start thinking beyond that and think, well, why do they keep making these mistakes? Maybe they're not mistakes. Maybe these are deliberate policies, and we need to talk about that.
I mean, it's not just it's not just the economic destabilization of these countries, the debt economy. All these globalist institutions and what they've done. I mean, that has to stop as well. Obviously, any country that stands up to the UN or to the globalist institutions gets hammered, like Libya, or has sanctions imposed on it, like Eritrea.
Yeah.
And Eritrea is, again, a very good example of people who don't want to immigrate. They don't want handouts. In fact, they don't even allow NGOs to work in the country. They're very proud. They've got a huge diaspora, hardworking diaspora, who send money back to Eritrea. They're building their country up, and they're getting hammered by the media. They're being called everything under the sun, including all those so-called anti-racist leftists. So, they are we need to be clear that they are the racists. They are the fascists. So with the mass migration agenda, you have a situation where just people are being shifted around the world, and from in many cases from countries that are actually not, where there are not any wars at all.
No, that's right.
So we've got a lot of Albanians in Ireland, Georgians,
competing for jobs with because I always say this, as a genuine socialist, as I believe myself to be, I've been against Ireland's, ever increasing integration with the European Union ever since I was a teenager, because I could see that, semi-skilled and non-skilled people, and we're not talking about unintelligent people. Many of my friends who worked in factories and who didn't go to third level, they're very smart cookies, those lads. Not because they didn't go to college doesn't make them unsmart, but they need those jobs. And what Gearóid is describing is absolutely bang on. How could any genuine socialist in the world want to open the country's doors to a low-skilled or no-skilled workforce who will work for less to come in and take jobs that would have been or should have been there for your own semi-skilled or unskilled workforce? I mean, Gearóid, it's not rocket science. You can't be a socialist and be in favour.
If you read the classics, the classic documents of Marxism and of the working class movement, I mean, one of the things they militated against was scabs, coming in who would, and they in southern France in 1947, the CIA brought in scabs to basically crush the workers' strike down there, which was becoming a major threat to U.S. interests in France and in Europe in general. They brought in scabs and the mafia, to crush the labor movement down there. And now Marseille today is a nightmare. I mean, it's an absolute nightmare. It's the crime capital of France, and all of the old Marseille, the people are leaving, and so on and so forth. But when the CIA did that in France, when they brought in scabs to destroy the workers' movement, their allies were the petty bourgeois Trotskyist left, that is to say, the Socialist Party. And in France, from the Second World War to today, the CIA, their preferred partners were the left. That very few people realized that they preferred, Mitterrand and the left to de Gaulle, because de Gaulle was, nationalist and was conservative and traditional, and I suppose too patriotic for the globalists. So that's the history of the labor movement in the last 30 years. It's just been a complete shambles. So no wonder, even for people on the left, I would say, you can't blame working class people for voting for these populists. I mean, who else are they going to vote for?
There's nothing else to vote for.
They're not going to vote for you guys.
No.
It's like, I mean, I that's why I've said I support them, because they're more intelligent than the idiots who are going to vote for, these traitors, they have at least, they're at least voting on the basis of class consciousness and their class interest, and, so having said that, I'm not trying to say that the populists necessarily serve working class interests. They don't. But, this is where things are going now. It's come down to globalism versus populism.
And chaos, as you described earlier on, and that chaos, I suppose, is going to intensify. We're just about out of time. Gearóid's website is gearóidcolmáin.org. He's on Twitter. He's at Broadford Soviet. I follow Gearóid on Twitter. I recommend you do as well, at Broadford Soviet, and it's gearóidcolmáin.org. Sincere thanks for the history lesson about Kashmir, by the way. Genuinely, people don't hear about
You're
this.
welcome.
And they need to hear it, and they need to put it in context with what's happening in their own backyard, because it's eerily similar, as you eloquently described earlier on. Please don't wait so long to come back, Gearóid. Just get in touch. Don't wait to be asked back. These are important issues, mate. And I love hearing from you. I really do. So thanks for that today.
Gurry Mili Magat.
Okay. Slán Thomas. Gurry Mili Magat, Gearóid. Bye for now. The brilliant Gearóid Colmáin live on the Richie Allen Show for Tuesday, September 17th. I really mean it. Go to gearóidcolmáin.org. I've just tweeted a link to where you can find his website, but he's at Broadford Soviet on Twitter as well. That's really, really intellectual stuff. That's terrific writing about Kashmir, India, Pakistan, the Western media treatment of it, and why. And how that segues into what we're seeing happen in our own countries here. It's really, really good, it really is good. Some guy from the Green Party, some putrid piece of, I'm not going to swear, human excrement, blocked me earlier on. He made some disparaging comments about the programme, because I did a piece on vaccines on the show yesterday. It wasn't an anti-vaccine tirade, but it was an anti-Sky News tirade about how Sky News had brought a GlaxoSmithKline doctor onto their program to talk about the need for more vaccines, for people to be more aware of meningitis, which is of no threat whatsoever to anybody, except for the tiny fraction of people who actually get it. You're 10 times more likely to be seriously injured in a car crash than you are to contract any type of meningitis. And this guy took exception to me talking about it, this Green Party arsehole. And he as far as I understand, because he's blocked me now, took exception to me pointing out that he obviously didn't listen to the show. He just immediately tweeted something hostile to me when I uploaded the little segment from last night's programme. I understand this complete and utter tosser might very well be making allegations about me that are not defamatory but libelous. Please screenshot them and send them to me via an email, because I'm going after these guys. This arsehole's name is Christine McDermott. Christine. So Christine might be a man, might be a woman, I have no idea. But a wretched coward. Blocked me so I can't see the defamatory stuff that's being posted about me. Right? It's no skin off my teeth. I don't melt down when somebody says that I'm a Holocaust denier. I'm obviously not. But when they do, and when they blatantly do, after they've been fucking warned not to do it again, I do get the solicitors involved. Because I like doing that. Because I've got the money to do that. I don't really. The future Mrs. Allen better not hear this. But I like occasionally to bury one of these arseholes. So please, I'd like. Do you know what? I'll get Rog onto it. Forget about it. Rog will do it for me. Rog will do it. And we'll find out then just how courageous, just how brave this Christine McDermott really is. We'll test him or her or it or them or they or whatever the fuck they call themselves. Anyway, that's it for the programme today. A big shout out again to Zach Voorhees. Thanks so much, Zach, for coming on the programme. Former Google and YouTube employee, whistleblower. Very important stuff, that. And I can't say enough about Gearóid Colmáin, who's based in Paris, is an Irishman, geopolitical analyst, and writes daily and broadcasts at gearoidocolmain.org. And if you can't spell that because you're not Irish, I've tweeted a link to the website as well as to his Twitter account, which is at Broadford Soviet. It is at Broadford Soviet on Twitter. I have been Richie Allen. Thanks for listening to Tuesday's programme. I'll be back with you tomorrow, Wednesday, at the usual time of 5 p.m. UK time. I was going to head off to Moor Lane to the Peninsula Stadium to watch Salford FC versus Grimsby tonight, but I don't have time to do that because I need to get the programme online. Next time Salford play in the evening, I will start the Richie Allen show a half hour earlier and finish a half hour earlier, and I'll get myself off to Moor Lane. But they're playing Grimsby, the mighty Grimsby, but I think I'll be able to watch it on the telly, or at least some of it anyway. Of course, that's the future Mrs. Allen permitting. Thanks for listening again. Look after yourselves and one another, and have a brilliant rest of your Tuesday evening. Alrighty. Do check out triggerwarning.tv for lots of terrific podcasts and broadcasts by Hayden and Graham. That's triggerwarning.tv. That's youtube.com/triggerwarning, by the way. I'm going out with none other than Manchester's The Hollies. Oh yeah. See you tomorrow.